So again, just to reiterate the thanks to everyone who's been working on this. I just want to thank Anu Gautam for working incredibly hard to put all these different panels together, to Marjorie Hassan, and to John McDermott to make sure everything runs smoothly when it does. So this is the third year that we've done this conference on engaging students through technology, and it was the first time we thought, hey, maybe we should ask some students what they think, how they want to be engaged, how they are engaged. And so that's what we're doing. Just in a preliminary conversation with these guys, already I've learned a tremendous amount and realized that they're thinking about things in ways we hadn't. As a teacher, I hadn't thought about them. With all the focus on new technologies in particular, you realize that new technologies work in concert with old technologies. They don't supplant them. They're not in competition with them. And just a quick spoiler alert, a multicolored pen could work really nicely with multicolored notes and text and font. So we have 4 students today, each with different majors, but they actually seem to agree on a lot, you'll see. The first speaker is going to be Thomas Jansen, who's a college senior majoring in architecture, sub-matriculating to the School of Design. He's a former photo editor for the 34th Street Magazine. He was a web development editor for the Daily Pennsylvanian, and he's currently a lab consultant at the Vitale Digital Media Lab. Thomas.
So I think you'll probably find that my experiences with at least note-taking are a little bit different than my peers. But I'd like to start off with a little case study of my experiences freshman year. I came to Penn from a very traditional high school. There was no blackboard, there were few projectors, and definitely no laptops in the classrooms. But as an avid technology user, I was eager to harness my laptop inside and outside the classroom. I held up on buying pens and notebooks, as some of my peers on the panel I think have continued to do for 4 years. But I acquainted myself with Microsoft Word's note-taking capabilities. I sat down in my first class and opened my laptop, eagerly started taking notes, and the next day I downloaded my professor's PowerPoint presentation and annotated it slide by slide. I was able to look up topics that weren't clear. I could save things away for further reading and follow the reference readings along line by line without printing them out. But I found that my note-taking prowess had sort of fallen by the wayside. I was able to type quickly, but I wasn't able to sort of organize my thoughts, and I found I was just transcribing my lectures' words as quickly as possible. I got hopelessly behind when doing anything other than typing, like fixing typos, trying to annotate it a little bit, underlining, italicizing, and bolding. And by the time I got to my calculus class, I completely gave up. There was no way I was going to be able to transcribe equations on the computer if I couldn't even bold things as I was going along. But I sort of persevered in my other classes, at least until the first exam, when I found myself daunted by dozens and dozens of pages of unformatted text. I hadn't had a chance to sort of condense it yet, and so I found that I was really sitting through the lecture again rather than saving myself time in the first place. Like, sure, I was able to search for notes, but I had no idea what was really important because I was just transcribing the whole time. So from then on, I've kept my laptop in my backpack as much as possible, at least while in the classroom. But I find that where technology really comes into play in my learning experiences is when I'm preparing for a test or an exam. I'm a visual learner, so being able to arrange things and see them all in the same place is really helpful. I'm an architecture major, which means I have a lot of art history classes and buildings, all sorts of stuff like that. And so when I'm coming to prepare for an exam, I find that I arrange all of the condensed information that I've already noted in charts, timelines, and just really well-formatted outlines. This is an example here, just a really basic example. There's not too much jargon on it. But once I have the information on my computer, this is done in InDesign, which is a very basic or a very powerful graphic layout program, but it could also be done in Publisher, Microsoft Word, or PowerPoint. I can sort of rearrange things until they make sense, and I can reveal connections that were formerly unseen to me just by seeing it all in the same place. Once I'm done, I print it out and look at it. But from there, I find that what really helps is being able to collaborate with my peers, and for that I use Google Documents. Essentially what it is it's an online suite of programs similar to Microsoft Office. There's a word processing program, a spreadsheet program, and a presentation program. And you can share the documents, and everyone can collaborate and edit them at the exact same time. So, go to the next one. This is an example of it here, and you can see that someone else is also editing at the same time. This is also for an art history class where we've gone through the readings and summarized them and uploaded them onto this Google document here. And what I've found is that by being able to see what everyone else is thinking at the same time, we can sort of harness a collective knowledge that reveals things that were otherwise completely unseen to me. So I think this can also be incorporated into the classroom. I've had professors who have suggested that we use it for working on group papers together, because you can see line by line as you're editing things. And in the same way, you can use Google Calendar, which is just an online calendar software that can be shared among people to see things updated instantly, sent to our phones. We can check it wherever we are, sitting in our apartments, at home for fall break, or even around the same table. We can edit things at the same time. And this is something that I know a lot of my peers use. And students, I find, are most accessible through the mediums that we've already used. Facebook, I think, is off limits. But Twitter, email, all those sort of things. And I guess in conclusion, there's nothing that we love more than a clear, concise email. I found that even if something's posted on the syllabus, on your website, or on Blackboard, being able to see it concisely, clearly in writing is really incredibly reassuring.
Okay, that's great. So we're just going to have everyone open up some opening comments, and then we'll take questions at the end. So the second speaker is Tatiana Pesa, who is a senior in the College of Arts and Sciences, double majoring in cinema studies and visual studies. She loves new media and technology and has been on the Student Technology Advisory Board for the past 4 years. Last summer, she worked as an intern at an internet design company called Hard Candy Shell, and she's now writing her visual studies thesis on social media communication and how it's impacting the net generation.
Hi. So for me, my experience with technology has been kind of different. At first, I used to take notes always by hand, and I still do for some classes. It's more appropriate. But in general, I started to take my computer to class, and it was heavy, and I'd get very distracted. So I did an experiment, and I bought this $2.99 Acer computer at Costco, and I decided to start using that to take my notes. I didn't want to invest any more money in it, so I didn't buy Microsoft Word. I didn't buy anything else, and I started using Google Docs. So I take my notes in Google Docs. This is an example. So I have there everything for all my classes. It's just easy. You don't have to save anything. It just goes automatically it just saves. I can open it from any computer. And then when it comes time to study, I will just put it in Microsoft Word and organize it better. But like this is also in my Gmail. You see it there, Google Docs. And this would be a blank document. This would be me taking like notes. And I just insert a horizontal line like that, and it just becomes very easy. I think that before technology was distracting if you had a computer, but now if you're taking notes by hand, you can have your phone, so it's really the same thing. And sometimes teachers talk really fast, and it's just much easier to have it all like that. And this computer it's like very light, lasts 8 or 9 hours, and it's just very easy and convenient.
Okay, thanks. That's great. So the third speaker is Rika Vogel, who's a senior in the college majoring in English with a concentration in creative writing. She studies contemporary poetics and is pleasantly surprised at the different ways that technology has increasingly become part of her life and her work.
So I obviously have not left the computer realm ever. Since I was born. A few things. Somebody said that Facebook is necessarily off limits. And as you'll see, I'm just going to go there first. This is a Facebook poem. It's a serial poem posted on the hour, new lines added. And those lines also have been generated by computer programs. So you throw a bunch of, you don't even throw words at a computer. You write a program that generates which words it'll choose. It has a dictionary, and then it puts them together from there. So all of this is put together by a computer program, and this asks more theoretical questions about authorship. But it also means that we can do some really fun and interesting things with programs and call them poems. Anyway, about Google, which we've been talking about, this is an example of Google Docs, or Google Documents. And you'll notice that there are spreadsheets in there that I use for scheduling. There are grant applications for different groups that I'm a part of. There's how to plan a bridal shower and a wedding. And walk shifts for some journal or something. And all of these work And all of these we can collaborate on and edit in real time, and as we collaborate, we can talk to each other because there's a function in the program that allows us to chat as we collaborate. You'll also notice on the side that this is a sidebar from a different account. It's for this journal literature called Kedma. And you'll notice that in there we have all our listservs. We have our copy editors, we have our past editors, we have our staff, we have our general listserv, we have new recruits. And it turns out that Google is just a great way to store information because it's always accessible online. And because that way I can send an email out and not worry about reformatting and not worry about it's in a document and I have to transfer it and bring it online because everything's online anyway. Speaking of which, this is a class listserv. And the way that it works is that you send your assignment in, let's say the day before class, and you send in your response. But the way that I take notes, it's not popping up. Interesting. Okay. The way that I take notes is that I'll just respond to myself and take notes within the body of the email. That way I have something that I can email out automatically if I need to. And that way also, you might even see there might be a digest there. So instead of getting individual emails from each person, which I do also, you can get a digest email through a listserv. And that just puts together everything that every person in the class emailed out for the day. And so then I actually have a lecture and notes from the lecture, because this is what the professor is going to use anyway, because it's discussion-based and it's a seminar. And all I have to do is just stick in my 2 lines of notes on the top, and I have the entire class online at any time that I need it. Aside from Google Documents, which is really useful, of course, we know Blackboard, we've seen it before. And so I was actually having a discussion with somebody before about video and about problems with video, because videos are a lot of times much larger files and harder to download, so they're very annoying to post, even though students want to see video of the lecture, audio, related links that are in video format. I really find YouTube useful because you can make channels private and not make them public and just invite certain people, let's say certain people in the class, so you can actually run a class through YouTube or on YouTube. Also useful about computers, because I use them all the time in every class. Wikipedia is the Bible, and we use it if a professor says something and I'm not really sure what it means and I don't want to bother the rest of the class and I don't want to sound moronic, then I look it up on Wikipedia, and all of a sudden I know everything about a specific area of poetry that I should have known about, and I can talk about it intelligently. Also interesting are track changes in Microsoft Word. If I need to edit something, I need to edit an article and to send it into an editor, but she also needs to track the changes that I've made. That way they know who made what changes. You can share the document also through any online platform, but you can also, Microsoft Word has a function where it highlights the changes that you've made, and you can do this in a number of different ways. You can set the settings to do it as you want, but then they know who's edited and what you've edited. And you also have a record of the document as it's gone along through its several evolutions. Also interesting about listservs, I've been in classes that run simultaneously on listserv and in the classroom, so that because classes may run on listserv either through Penn or through a Google group, you can send out links, send out related information as the professor's talking, and then that stimulates class conversation. And it's also really useful because then we have all this information on hand that we may not have time to talk about in class, but that everyone's thinking of anyway, and that we're all sharing. So all of a sudden you have 2 classes that run at the same time that connect to each other. Yeah, I think that's it, but there's probably more.
That was great. Well, time for questions to get into the more. So the final speaker is Pranav Merchant, who's a senior majoring in history, the study of which has been a significant reason for his use of technology. His interest in technology spans a variety of fields, including medicine, sciences, and business, as well as ethics. And he's also a student on the Technology Advisory Committee.
Thanks, Peter. As you mentioned, I'm a history major, so I'm also going to be talking about Google. No, just kidding. I'm going to shift a little bit away and talk more about my experiences using technology and the internet specifically for historical research. most people, I imagine, assume historical research involves going into an archive and sifting through documents and videos and images and artwork in a painstakingly slow process. But in my experience, in the short time I've been in school and done some significant historical research, I have not had to do that as much as one would imagine, because the internet may be a lot of things to a lot of people. It is a lot of different things to a lot of people. But one of the things it is, and one of the things I think many people don't know about, is that it's become a treasure trove of primary sources for historical purposes. And though my experience has only been involved with using it for historical research, I'm certain that if you're an art historian or a sociologist or you're studying business or economics, that even if your focus is on those fields, the internet can still be of use, because it allows people from all sorts of places and all sorts of backgrounds to post primary source information, whether it's statistics or historical record or diaries or anything you can imagine, almost. And for what I've realized is that the internet is sort of known to be a very democratic medium, whereas everybody has a voice. And even in terms of, with respect to historical research, that's the case. What I mean is, anybody can post something of historical value. It can be bottom up or top down. Let me talk a little bit what I mean by bottom up or top down. Bottom up simply means anybody without resources, without influence, without money, any individual person can post something on the internet that has some historical value. For instance, when we all think, I'm interested in World War II, and when we think of World War II, we think of typically black and white images, black and white video. But even when we think of World War I, we think of the same thing. What I found, thanks to the internet, is that there are color images and and there is color video of time before 1960. That time period existed in color as well. It was a shock for me to find out. But honestly, in all my time in school, I'd never seen a color video or color picture of any time from 1900 to 1960. And amazingly, the way I found out about World War II being in color was through YouTube. If you do a YouTube search, you'll find, just do a YouTube search of color footage World War II. You'll find so many videos. Well, maybe not so many, but a good number of color videos from World War II. On a similar note, I've also found color footage and color pictures from World War I, or the pre-World War, basically the pre-World War II area, on the internet as well. And I'd never ever come across that in my classroom studies. And to many people that may not mean much. Okay, footage and video from that period. But coming at it from a historical perspective, seeing these things in color really gives a different perspective on the things you study and read about, and it really adds more color, pun intended, to the stuff we study, and in black and white. So that's really what I mean by bottom up, with in terms of people posting things that they somehow have access to. Maybe they've done the research and they've come across it and they want to share it with people so they can post it on the internet, and hopefully somehow we can come across it. But in addition to bottom-up availability of primary sources, there's also a lot of top-down primary source availability. And in my experience, I think there's more top-down than bottom-up. And what I mean by top-down is institutional dissemination of historical documents, images, statistics. University libraries, museums, private foundations, they all have an interest in sharing the resources they have. So what they do is they digitize these primary resources. We all know about. I mean, many of us might know about Google Books digitizing recent publications, but many institutions have digitized older publications, historical documents, and put those online. I'll give some examples just to illustrate. at the University of Texas in Austin, at the Presidential Library for Lyndon Johnson, not only are your presidential memos, letters, and similar documents posted online, but so are the actual Lyndon Johnson audio tapes, his phone conversations. So you can go to his website and listen to those, and that's really an amazing, exhilarating experience to not have to really go all the way to a different state or a different country, and still have the opportunity to listen to this, literally listen to history in the making on these audio tapes. Similarly, the University of Pennsylvania just had a link to the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library, posting almost some 50,000 images, images and pictures, but I also imagine documents of the first Iraq War in the early 90s. And another example of I did some historical research, economic historical research over this past summer. Nothing too extensive, but I was looking for economic data from 1900 to 1950. So I was able to find a lot of historical statistics through internet searches. For instance, the University of Chicago has a big South Asia collection. So what I found was facsimiles or digitized images of British ledger books on various statistics from India, I believe it was, and it was in fact from the middle of the 19th century all the way up to the first few decades of the 20th century, and these were economic statistics with respect to all sorts of fields. I mean, it could be imports or exports or production, whatever you think of. So that's just another example of some of the wide range of historical materials available. Oh, sure, yeah. So I'll just say what I found the significance to be of this for other fields as well. It sort of makes things more accessible for people who have an interest in these academic areas. You no longer have to be sort of in a sort of an academic bubble in a school to have access to this stuff. But also a problem is that it's still not necessarily poorly organized, and most of the stuff to get access to, you need to go through a university library. And if you're not part of an institution as a student or a professor, it's difficult to have access to these institutional resources.
Okay, great. No, it's really interesting, and I think brings up a lot of issues that wouldn't normally come up in this context today. So, I mean, one is just the reliability on how much you rely on Google for a lot of reasons. But one, because you're mobile, it syncs, it's collaborative. These are all things that are important. The other thing I found really interesting is the emphasis on note-taking. Something I think about a little bit when I'm structuring my curriculum and my lectures, but maybe not enough. What are the best ways that faculty can help you with note-taking? Is it by posting PowerPoint lectures, by reinforcing, as Rick was saying, by reinforcing things that go on in the lecture through listservs, by posting things on Facebook, by giving you outlines?
I don't know if this is necessarily note-taking, but for one of my classes, the teacher has a website and there is a syllabus and everything is online and all the readings are online. Sometimes I have to put my pen key in order to get access. Yeah. But it's really, really helpful to have everything digitized too. And I personally have to print things out to read them better and stuff. I don't like reading on my computer, but it's really helpful when I can just go and I have a website and I can see that.
Sometimes I do wish that things posted to, let's say, Blackboard or that like the course documents that are posted online, that I wish they were editable, which is not a word, but that I could edit them also and take notes in them. That way I don't have to go back and like have a stack of papers on one side and then have all my notes that are like happening and changing as the class goes on the other side. But yeah, online syllabus is really, really useful, especially because it links to everything else and then everything is online already. You don't have to worry about which documents you have with you and which documents you don't.
I just get one more question before I open it up. I just wonder, sort of in general, how much technology is you consider just a drag, or like it doubles the amount of work you do for a course. All of a sudden, your class time isn't just 3 hours a week, but you have 6 hours a week that you're also on a listserv or something else. And so when you hear that some professor's using a blog or a wiki or something else in class, do you immediately think, oh no, or is it, great, that's going to be useful? Or
oh no. It's really not that much of a pain because it doesn't take long blogs, the requirements they have, but it's just sort of an additional. I mean, the internet is a very complex place, so just having to go back into another nook and cranny of it to do that just sort of comes out to be sort of irritating. It is because no one really. I mean, we don't really have time to read everyone's blog postings and really have a good discussion. At least I haven't always seen that happen, so it sort of takes away from its value.
Especially the collaboration interfaces on Blackboard are really not easy, not easy to use or to collaborate with. You do it more of it because of a chore than because it doesn't have any flow.
is there anyone else?
Well, I mean, at the same time though, I won't read every single post that goes out to the listserv, but one that I get everything to my phone anyway. So it'll come and I'll reply to something that I just read, let's say that morning, like reading the New York Times online or whatever, like reading some blog that relates to that, and I'll send that out. So we're not going to read everything, but it'll be really interesting. It'll be like interesting to enter to the class.
So this sort of content tend to be better than blogs or discussion posts in Blackboard because you just do it with your email address. One email account. It's very much more fluid, easier.
Something else we noticed when we were talking just the other day is, in some ways, Google's already replaced Blackboard. They have all the pieces. They just haven't come up with Google University yet. They could bring them all together.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm happy to open up to anyone else.
I'm curious, this partially relates to the note-taking question, but when your professors use PowerPoint in the classroom, when you think it's helpful and when it becomes a distraction?
I mean, I think that it's always nice to have it illustrated, but I think that once it gets too far, it just becomes distracting, especially if you've got some sort of burdened PowerPoint presentation with all these animations and everything. Really, as long as we're consistently being engaged, it's great. But if you're jumping between mediums, there's always a possibility of just losing someone. I know I was sitting in class this morning, and the minute the PowerPoint projector, the projector turned off, the person in front of me was on Facebook, and they were on Facebook for the rest of the class. So if it's sort of consistent, I think it's great.
But then also at the same time, you don't want to pack so much information into the slide that looking at it, you want to drown in all the words, and you don't pay attention to the slide anymore. So
I would think if there's going to be a PowerPoint, it's good to have it posted well in advance of the class. Many professors post it the day of or the day before, but personally, I think it's nice to be able to print it out and come to class with it. Many professors are aware of that, but they don't post them early enough. So
you're assuming much more organization.
I mean, I guess I am, but this I guess something to keep in mind. It's nice to have it maybe a few days in advance, so we have time to print it out and maybe go over it and bring it as well.
Sometimes teachers also have a PowerPoint in class and then take away things and post that, and that just makes it more confusing when you're trying to put things together at the end. That your PowerPoint doesn't have things that were in class and vice versa.
Yeah. It's funny for me to be sitting in this position because somehow I used to be over there not that long ago, and now I look at the divide and it is much larger than I thought it was. But the perception that we're getting is that our students are now perpetually connected, they're perpetually on Facebook, and is that true? Is that the way you want to be? Is that the way you want us to redesign engaged learning? Or do you want to come to lecture and learn, or is there somewhere in between? I'm trying to figure out how much of it is sort of push versus pull in terms of this engaging students with technology kind of thing.
I don't think there's one answer to that. I think it depends on the class, depends on the topic. For some classes, I take notes still by hand because it's just much easier and it's more cohesive to the environment and to the topic. So I think it depends it's like there's not one rule. In some classes you just have to be more engaged and it's easier on the computer, and in some classes you're not.
wrong. I do everything on the computer, but at the same time, I love bookstores. So, yeah, I guess there's a happy medium somewhere, but it depends on the class, depends on the student. It's just, the thing about everything digitized is that it's so useful because it's always accessible, and you can always edit it, and you can always just keep changing it, as opposed to having like papers everywhere. It's just convenient.
I always find that the myth that everyone's online all the time and there's this huge, very high level of computer literacy is really a myth. That there's a certain core of students who do everything on the computer, who are always online, but there are plenty who aren't interested, other than in social contexts, using Facebook and learning a new program or using some sort of new website really does seem daunting to them. So I think we have the tech savvy students with us. But there's really a range of students, and maybe it would have been interesting to get someone in who doesn't own a laptop as well.
So during classes, when you're sitting there in class, and from this lecturer standpoint, it's like this, and are you really listening to what? I mean, it's like talking to a bunch of people with paper bags on their heads. There's like nothing coming back. And I always took pride in engaging the students with stories and things that added to, and there's like nothing. I mean, it's like really going on a date with a bag over your head. But do you feel the loss of communication?
I do absolutely. I know that I'm alone in this panel on thinking that, but I think that like the moment the screen's open, like everyone, yes, everyone has the email on their phone. Most people have the courtesy to put it away during class, but when you're on your computer, it's like you just can't resist like checking your email every 5 minutes because maybe the next greatest thing was just released and you need to buy it in the next 5 minutes, or maybe the lecture just isn't interesting enough, and that's why you have the computer out. That's what I found. But yeah, once it's open, I'm just sort of like disengaged, and that's why I just try to avoid it in general.
I work in the vet school, and we're trying to go paperless, and this is the first year that like 99% of students are sitting there with notebooks open, and it's not. I don't think it's good. Like I just feel like no one's paying attention at all. Like you might as well just be talking on an intercom or something. There's nothing coming back to the faculty.
It's harder to stay concentrated, but which is why I use a different computer, not my normal computer. But I think that a student can still just zone out, and it's just like the pose will be differently. They'll just be like this, and they'll be on their phone, and instead of like being on their computer. So I think that a student can zone in and out, and I think it could be easier on the computer, but if you just get used to taking notes and not going on Facebook and not doing anything else, then it's also sometimes I just take notes, and don't look at any other website.
I have a question about preferences. So if an instructor designs something in a new software and brings it to the class, and there's a Dazzle component, what would your preference be? Would you like to learn about the software, or would you like to just learn about what the instructor aimed to teach you and discover the software on your own? What would your insight?
The software.
You'd want to.
Depends on the software.
Depends on the
Would
software.
it improve our grade if we learn about the software?
Say that
Would
again.
it improve our grade if we learn about the
But, so it's always a challenge when I go into the classroom. I want to know, do they want a little bit of preface of, how I came upon to this, because I'm learning as much as I'm teaching, or, should I just go into what I came prepared to? And so, what would you say, Luca? You did.
Oh, I would actually love a little 5-minute, this is what this program is.
Okay.
Just so that then I can look up more information about it if I want to, and then use it for other things. I don't think it should overwhelm the class.
Okay.
But it would be really useful. Yeah.
It would be? Okay. You had your hand.
we're in class again. I think there's value, but I would imagine a lot of people would listen, but then they sort of forget. So if you're going to dedicate class time to it, I think it's better to first test it with 1 or 2 students privately, see what they think, do they find it interesting.
Okay.
And only if students find it interesting, if the sample finds it interesting, then just take class time.
Okay.
Because I feel, there's a lot of stuff going on in class, a lot of stuff outside class,
Sure.
and you may come across something new, but then you just forget about it.
It probably also depends if it's related to the class. If I would use it on an assignment for that class, then I would like to know about it.
Okay.
You know? So I'm taking a class in digital poetry right now, and there are lots of programs that I can use to build a poem with digitally, and I want to know how to program. And I don't about certain things. I would love to.
Okay.
So it depends.
Good. Thanks.
I think that maybe like one last thing on that is when you're explaining it, don't just explain like how you came across it and how it works, but maybe how it's going to be relevant to the students like in the workforce or whatever. Penn is very pre-professional, and I know that my classmates, I'm in architecture, we get 3 or 4 new programs every semester that we need to learn, and they'll pick it up eventually, but unless they know how it's applied in real life, then it's just not really relevant to them.
It also depends how accessible the software is to the students. Sometimes I took a class, a film class, and we had to write a screenplay, and we had to find a software. So there were so many, and you had to buy one, and then we were explaining one in class, but it depends if it's free, if it's not, sometimes some things Penn can help you get.
Yeah, if it's expensive, then yeah.
Yeah, I usually try to, as a rule, take things that are in the public domain.
I've also found that sometimes there's resistance for students to learning new software, but then once they learn it, they go on and they continue to use it even after the course is over.
Right.
Yeah, Rebecca, you get your...
Yeah, I was surprised that none of you mentioned sort of razzle-dazzle technologies that are sort of we sometimes encouraged to try and think of, things like Google Earth, things like making movies, having students write graphic novels, stuff like that. Have you come across those things in your courses and you just didn't want to talk about them, or you haven't come across them? Or?
Well, I've come across them, but that's also because I do arts. But I had this assignment where the question was, how do you quantify language? And I distilled the conversation down into its mathematical components. A is 1, B is 2, C is 3. And then created a musical score out of that, and then put that through a program that made me some tracks, and I can play language now. Like, that's beautiful. And their movie making is really useful because I can do some twist on an assignment and make it a movie, and it's just as valuable, and it's really interesting, and it's just people about a different way of using knowledge and using a certain piece of technology. I've never used Google Earth. There are just some things that are practical that aren't so narrowly focused. So I'll use GarageBand again, so it's good that I learned that, which is a music program in every Mac. And I'll use iMovie, and I'll use all these programs that are free in the public domain because they're free, and because then that means that everyone else is using them, which means they have those programs so they can download pieces that I've done, and I can download pieces that they've done, and we can work together. So it depends, I guess.
On the other side of the spectrum, I use Final Cut, all of the Adobe software, all of that, but it's been more course specific.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It's a good thing that I can't, because it's like they're the most professional software, so
I work in the media lab, so we get a lot of the classes who have, comic books to design, video, trailers, all sorts of stuff like that. And I've never actually had a class that's used these, but what I sort of perceive from them, from the students at least, is that the task sort of becomes more about learning the technology than it does about the actual project. So unless it's like a very concise, task, like make 2 pages of this comic book, or make like a 30-second or 1-minute trailer, then that's productive for them because they can sort of figure out how to do it quickly, and to some extent, like maybe fake the software, like fake the process of it. But when it becomes like a long project, it just seems like they get frustrated and end up putting it off to the end, and then don't have the resources to successfully complete it.
I was curious to what extent you guys came to Penn the knowledge of the perils of the internet in terms of plagiarism, and also maybe even the working knowledge of how to do research on the internet. So what was your, digital media literacy coming into Penn? you know, to what extent were you explicitly taught it? Sorry, that's sort of multi-part, but I want to know sort of what you came in with versus what you've learned since you've been here.
I can start. I used Microsoft Word before I came here, and that was about it. I wrote papers in it, and once in a while I changed the font. And those were really experimental poems, you should know. And then I got to Penn, and all of a sudden things were happening online, and I was using YouTube, and I was using Facebook, and I was using Twitter for work, which is really strange. I don't have a personal Twitter account. And I'm using it for events and PR and networking. And I use listservs obsessively, and create poems through digital pieces, and write papers using the sources that Wikipedia gives me that I can find in paper and Van Pelt, so that all of a sudden I have a list of sources that I can use for a paper without even having to do any research to begin with. And most of the library is online, and I can write a paper entirely of digital sources and not carry any books with me ever. So you pick it up as you go along because you have to, but also because it's just so much easier.
In terms of copyright, in high school we used to use something called turnitin.com.
Yes.
And I've heard that there's something of that in Blackboard now, but I didn't know this before. And in terms of research, I think that Penn has, we were talking about this in the technology board the other day, that we have so many resources, and it's not centralized at all. So a lot of times I end up just going to Google instead of going through different Penn search engines and different things that Penn offers. And I just think that if that were centralized, because sometimes I've looked through Google, I've looked online and I don't find anything, and then finally, my last resort, I'll go to the Penn resources and I find way better things than I would have found anywhere else. But that should be like the #1 go-to spot.
I wonder if you have any of the Penn Library apps, phone apps.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that most students come in with very little experience of like online research, all the copyright sort of stuff. I know for our history class, I had Ed Deegan from the libraries came and gave us like a great seminar on like how to do online research. But for the most part, most of my classes, like really they go to Google. And from there they get to Google Books, which gives you some great resources, like all the stuff that's no longer copyright, where you can download, you know, full texts of books is great. But most people don't have a working knowledge of how to use the Penn resources that are on the site.
And there are also, you pick up knowledge of certain websites that are like centralized information database places, and a lot of times they don't really care about copyright laws, or maybe I found that because maybe the poets don't care. But there are websites like Ubu where there's lots of art and poetry and visual art online. There are different library sites where most things are accessible, especially if you stick in your Penn key. So what I found is that there's this Responsa project that I do some Jewish study stuff that has a lot of biblical commentary online that you wouldn't be able to find for free in other places. Free is a good thing. And I can just type in like Bar-Ilan Responsa project into the search engine in Franklin in the Penn Library, and it'll pop up and I have access to it. So even if I don't use Penn libraries, I use the access it gives me to other libraries. So I have found it kind of centralized in that way.
Do any of you use Google Scholar? Do you know Google Scholar?
To some extent, I've used it before, yes. It wasn't something that was ever pointed out to me in class, but again, it's just something that came, like, I was Googling for books after the library closed at, like, 10:30 on a Friday night for a paper, and I came across Google Books, and from there, Google Scholar. But I found that it wasn't quite as useful as the Penn library sources, like Web of Knowledge, I think it is, the ISI, etc.
Well, I asked because if you go to the Scholars to the library, it links to all the library resources, so you get best of both worlds here.
Oh, there's another hand back there.
Yeah, so there's quite a disparity in the student body in terms of starting with freshmen through seniors, experience with technology, etc., and then who would have a laptop, etc. So keeping that in mind, and then just the vast differences between a linguistics class and a history class, or a math class and a French class. What would be the optimal balance in the classroom in terms of a presentation? Just a common ground, what would really attract you to the lectures, to the professor, to the class, get you excited? Would there be a balance between the art of teaching and the art of learning? Human, human element, and blending that with the technology. You maybe have to think about that, but that's really interesting to me because there are so many gaps at this point in time. So when I walk into my classroom, I realize that my students are more savvy than I am. My daughter has to put things on the computer. However, I'm learning, but I don't want to give up that eye contact. The art of telling stories, the art of drawing in your students and everyone's looking at you. And yet I want to be able to reach my students where they're at also, which is technically savvy. So how do you walk into the class, what would you like to see? Maybe one class, or maybe over the semester, what are some of the components that would marry the two?
I think you're right that the most important thing in my estimation would be an interesting lecturer. Someone who's not just talking, but actually, you touched upon engaging the students. And for me personally, even though, I may use a computer occasionally, if the professor is not able to lecture in a energetic way, I find that we sort of almost lose focus. So technology, I think, is very important, but ultimately it comes down to more human element. I think that's so key in terms of teaching. In terms of using technology, I think a good way is to use PowerPoint, but just have basic facts. But still, it's the professor that's the source of knowledge, not the technology or the presentation. So that way, it sort of supplements the teaching, but still requires students to pay attention to the professor. I think that's a good balance.
And then again, there are always things that students will pay attention to. Like, for the most part, we'll always pay attention to video and to audio. But some of the most engaging lectures or engaging seminars that I've had might not even include technology at all. They're just great professors.
I would agree that the art of teaching, as you said, is definitely the most important. But if you want to engage students using multimedia and stuff like that, I really think that either setting up a Blackboard where you can post all of your multimedia or a blog, and then really just sending out brief emails saying I talked about this in class. This is something that's fascinating, and just 2 sentences. Everyone's going to click on a link. If you show them a presentation, are they going to go home and look at it? Probably not. If you post it on Blackboard, will they see it? It's possible. But if you send out a link, everyone will click on it.
I agree with what they said about the essence is really in the classroom, but in terms of a platform that is compatible across the board, really the one thing would be the internet. So, what he said about Blackboard, I would do on a website. I would have some centralized place where you could communicate and you could have everything as a base, and where anybody, no matter what kind of computer you have, no matter where you are, you can access that and you can see that. So it could be the best way that would be across the board complementary.
So I can just get the last question. We keep talking about this environment in which students are kind of learning either passively or just by absorbing and listening or being distracted. But in the seminars, often students are asked to also participate by doing presentations. So I wonder what you think when you have to do a presentation. Do you immediately think, you want to put together a PowerPoint presentation, you want to find video? When you're asked to teach the class, to do a presentation, what kind of technology do you like to use? Or do you prefer not to would you rather not use anything?
I've not used anything because it takes time still to make an online presentation, but that's just me. I think it's nice just to have it in my own notes and then talk. That way it also allows me to hopefully do more engaging.
I prefer Keynote over PowerPoint, and I think PowerPoint just helps you both have a flow and an organizational what you're saying, and to keep people interested. It's a way of organizing class and having something visual is always helpful.
And does it feel natural now? When you use the presentation, you automatically open up Keynote?
Depends what the presentation is about, but yeah.
Well, and also if we're in classes that have everything online through either the professor's website or like some syllabus that we post to Blackboard that's hyperlinked so that you just go out to all these different websites instead. So it's kind of centralized, but kind of not. I can just use those as visual aid. So I'm talking about this particular poem that I need to take apart, or I'm talking about this paper. So I pull it up and highlight some things as I'm going along. It takes no preparation, but at the same time everybody knows exactly what I'm talking about, and also everyone has access to the document. And they all have, a lot of time people will have their computers with them. So it'll be on the big screen, but they'll also be able to magnify whatever portions and sections of it they want as we go along.
I mean, yeah, I would say the same. Like a nice glossy PowerPoint that's not too complicated, and if I'm giving a presentation, maybe, you know, a really concise outline to go along with it. But any bell and whistle, probably not.
Well, thanks. You guys are really great to put on the spot like this. Thanks.